Good afternoon. My name is Jerry Fortelo. Thank you very much for listening to our talk. I want to talk a little bit about cyber resilience. I have a PhD in computer science, focusing on security, and I'm working for Dell Technologies and helping customers look at their environments and looking at how they can increase the cyber resiliency of their environments. So in order to talk about cyber resilience, I need to define cyber resilience. So cyber resilience is not necessarily about cybersecurity. It's not necessarily about how we detect intrusions. It's not necessarily about how we block intrusions. Resiliency really means reducing the impact of an event, so becoming more resilient in the face of cyber threats. So cyber resilience is really talking about how can we reduce the impact of a cyber event, and how can we make sure the impact to your business isn't something that your business is unable to survive. So in what context are we working and do we find ourselves in today? So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're seeing in the market, and no doubt you will have a very good idea of what's happening in the market, because like all IT professionals, we read newsletters and we look at various online publications. Then I want to talk a little bit about what that means. I want to talk a little bit about what industry bodies have done to try to help organizations and businesses and governments increase their cyber resilience, and then talk a little bit about what governments are doing from a regulation point of view. And then I want to talk a little bit about solutioning. So how do we actually build this? What sort of things can we do that are best practice to try to help increase the cyber resilience of your organization? So the reality is we're in the middle of digital transformation, and there's so many quotes around about what's happening in the business, about what we're seeing organizations do. Every customer I talk to is transforming themselves. They're bringing their data closer to the customer. They are agile, they have velocity, they want to bring new products to market very, very quickly. And this is a massive drive, because in the digital world, you don't survive if you don't innovate and you don't do things quickly, right? And we've seen many, many examples of what happens. But there are some downsides of this digital transformation. The way I always look at it is it's a balance. Like everything we do in security, it's a balance between business imperatives and total security, right? So if you look at what digital transformation is about, it's about time to market. It's about leveraging cloud resources to be able to spin up when load requires and then spin back down when it doesn't. It is about bring your own device. People entering the workplace these days want to use their own devices. They want to use their own laptops. They want to use their own phones. And even before COVID, there was a push to work from home. People wanted to balance work and life. They wanted to be able to work from home. They didn't want to commute. And it's consumption based, right? We only use things when we need them. And if we don't need them, we get rid of them. And we need to balance that against security. The need for governance will never go away. The drive to reduce cost will never go away, right? Building a brand new service at a cost which is not scalable isn't going to work either. We've got to look at security, right? There's nothing we can do these days without security, and we'll talk more about what that is. And we're moving more into OPEX and CAPEX buckets, and moving money around depending on the businesses in. So what are we seeing in the market from a cyber event? You know, there's many statistics out there, and look, it doesn't really matter what these slides say. All of us that work in IFT have seen this increase in the results of cyber events, and we're seeing an increase in attacks, and we're seeing an increase in sophistication of attacks, and we're seeing an increase in cost associated with a cyber event, right? And all of those are increasing. And there's a number of reasons for that, which I'll talk about in a second. The really interesting thing is looking at the average cost of a cyber attack. And generally this is related to the length of time and the value of the transactions that are happening in organizations. So generally banks have very, very good security. And therefore, if an event happens, they'll generally deal with it reasonably quickly. But because they are moving so much money, the cost is very high. We're seeing the same thing in utilities, but in this case, it's about length of time. We've seen attacks on water purification. We've seen attacks on electricity grids. We've seen attacks on public transport, right? So all of these affect revenue, but they also affect confidence in an organization. So what's happening? If you think about security in the past, it was easy, right? We put all of our important data in our data center and we build a wall, right? We built a firewall, we built defense in depth, we had intrusion detection on our hosts, we had network intrusion detection on our network firewalls, we ran antivirus, we did all those things. The trouble is these days, we can't do that anymore. The walls of our data center have been breached, and for good reason, because we're undergoing digital transformation. So I think there's two things that are actually contributing to the increase of cyber events. The first one is the attack surface of an organization has increased, right? And what that means is that in the past, it was easy because everything was in a data center. Now, because of drivers of digital transformation, we're seeing that the data center become bigger and bigger, right? So it's very important that that we recognize that. So digital transformation is one of those things that it increases the attack surface. With digital transformation, in a lot of cases, we're trying to bring data out to the customer. I want my customer to have direct access to their bank balance. I want my customer to have direct access to their medical records. I want my customers to have direct access to their car registration, their tax, their social security, their health benefits. All those things mean that we're now moving our data outside of the data center. There's generally in many organizations also shadow IT. We've got a business-focused IT teams that are using technology such as cloud and other things, and they don't necessarily have the same security credentials as our IT teams do. A great example is, a lot of the new databases such as Mongo are, consumed by digital transformation. The trouble is they're installed by non-IT people. Anyone that works in IT knows that if you install something, you change the password straight away. There were 26,000 Mongo databases that did not change the default password. So they were attacked by ransomware. And, at the time it asked for 0.2 Bitcoin, which these days is about 14,000 US dollars to fix it, right? Singapore Health was hit a couple of years back, about 3 years back. Again, that moving data outside of the data center means it becomes easier to attack. Bring your own device. Bring your own device is also led for ways for organizations to be attacked, right? Because in many cases, without proper security on a BYOD device, it can be the way that a threat actor actually gets into your organization, right? Because we want to give our people access to our internal systems, access to internal data. And then cloud. Cloud is outside the moat, right? Cloud is not in your data center. Cloud is not subject to your firewalls. It's not operated by your IT teams. It contains a whole bunch of new services and applications that people don't necessarily understand. S3 is a great example. There's many, many examples where unsecured S3 buckets had led to leaking of information, right? So we've increased the attack surface of our organization. Our threat actors, so the bad guys, are now more motivated, right? So, we've got drivers for crime. We've got insiders that want to hold the organization at ransom. We've got espionage, we've got hacktivism, terrorism, and cyber warfare. And we'll double click on a couple of those. So cyber criminals, it has become easier and easier to monetize a hack, right? If you look at security 10 years ago or 20 years ago, if you wanted to make money out of hacking, you would have to hack into something like a bank. You would have to subvert all of their technology and then find a way to move data out without being detected. And that was hard. So with the advent of things like Bitcoin for transport of illegal money and anonymous transfer, with the advent of crypto ransomware, we're now attacking individuals and attacking organizations, and makes it very, very easy to actually monetize this. And everywhere you see the costs of ransomware are increasing, and people are paying the criminals in order to get their data back, but that's not always working. Okay, if you look at the targets, and I know this is 2017, but the numbers are still the same. Anywhere where there is important data is a target for ransomware. But if you combine that with industries that don't necessarily have the same level of security, they become a real target. And that's why you see healthcare, that's why you see education, that's why you see those things become very, very big targets for ransomware. There's many hacktivists, people hacking for a cause because WikiLeaks introduced a paywall. Iranian, Turkish, Ukrainian, nationalistic hacktivists are attacking critical infrastructure in countries in order to make their point, right? So there's a leak around the Panama Papers where someone hacked into accounting firms. There was a WikiLeaks hack. There was attacks against the Iranian government. Someone took over all the monitors at the airport in order to be able to pass their message on. And in Australia, about 6 or 7 days ago, one of our television networks was attacked, and they went down and suffered significant issues. And then finally, we've actually got well-resourced nation state. This is cyber warfare. The Americans allegedly did it to the Iranians with Stuxnet. North Korea apparently attacked Sony. NotPetya was a crypto ransomware that came from Russia and didn't attack Russian. So there's lots of different nation states attacking. Taiwan gets hit by China. The Australian government has been hit by cyber events. Again, the thinking is that this might be coming from China. But again, nation states are now fighting each other when it comes to this. The really interesting thing is when nation states attack, they are trying to hit critical infrastructure. So this is not only banks. This is healthcare. This is education. This is utilities. It's water. It's power. It's internet. It's transport. It's energy. All those things become very, very important. And therefore, this is not just for big banks. This is not just for organizations that move lots of money. This is for anyone that has critical infrastructure become a target. And that's why we see lots of legislation across Asia, Singapore, Australia, Taiwan, India, starting with it. Vietnam has got critical infrastructure legislation that increases the security requirement for anything that's critical. So what's happening? What's the reality? Again, you look at lots of different statistics, and they say 70% of organizations were compromised last year. That may be true, but it's not necessarily a big attack, right? This might be someone's laptop was encrypted, or a file share was encrypted because someone executed a Trojan, right? So lots and lots of organizations are being hit, but not necessarily being hit with an advanced persistent threat, right? And a threat that is trying to take down the organization. The first one we really had was Sony. And this was a big shift. The attack on Sony was not about making money. It was not about stealing data. It was about taking down an organization. The attack on Sony in 2014 was about destroying Sony. It was about deleting their data. It was about making sure the organization actually went bankrupt. And that was really, really important. And that really saw a shift in what was happening. We're seeing more and more that as threat actors breach the walls of your organization, instead of launching an attack straight away, they will actually wait and look at what's happening in your organization. They will find where your anti-malware is. They will find where your command and control servers are. They will find where your security operations center is. They will find where your backups are. They will find where your disaster recovery is, right? So they're actually mapping your entire organization to be sure that when they attack, they hit all the very important parts of your organization. And that's really, really been a big, big shift. It's been a shift to breach and attack to now breach and dwell, to look around, to find what's happening in the organization. And we see the results everywhere. There's the first picture here is a kiosk in a shopping center in Singapore. Baltimore City was attacked with a ransomware attack costing $18 million. And everyone knows about the attack on Merck, where they hit the shipping databases. So basically, Merck ended up with hundreds of thousands of containers on ships and had no idea what was in them, where they were going, who they were going to, right? So all those things are happening. They are the funnier ones. In APJ, this is a billboard in Thailand. I like that one. Someone hit the computer driving the billboard. We saw the one in Singapore. This is a ATM in Indonesia. ATMs just run computer software. And in fact, a lot of banks have actually moved to PC-based ATMs. ATMs used to be specialized hardware, but now everything is PCs because it reduces costs. And this is an example of a Bank of China ATM as well. So we've seen all those interesting pictures, but we've also seen big attacks. We've seen attacks against Travelex. In Australia and worldwide, we saw an attack against Toll. And again, we suddenly realized that even though they are not attacking us, if they are attacking a supplier of my organization, then they're affecting me. So in Australia, Toll is a big logistics company, and a lot of our big organizations use Toll to move data around. So when Toll went down, to move goods around. So when Toll went down, no goods moved, right? So it was affecting a whole bunch of follow-on organizations. We had attacks against Cognizant. So we're seeing more and more attacks against service providers, because if I breach a service provider, I breach many different organizations, as we saw with SolarWinds, actually, the latest attack. But they're not just attacking IT systems, they're also attacking OT systems. So these is operational technology. So these are your control systems that control your water pumps. These are the control systems and monitoring systems that control your electricity grids, your water purification, your nuclear um, factories, all those things are controlled by computers. And in the old days, all those things were in separate networks that were not connected to the internet. But because we want to pull that data out, we want to do things with it, a lot of operational controls are now actually on the networks. So they are targets for attacks. So this is not just about IT systems, but now also operational control systems that are being hit. And we're seeing more and more attacks are moving down the stack. So they're not just attacking the software, but we're attacking BIOS. We're attacking lots of other bits of the control stack in order to be able to get control of environments. So what's happening? What's the industry doing? What's IT doing to help with that? And there's been a couple of things that have happened. The first one is there's been push from within industries, and this has generally come from financial organizations. This is an example of something that's happening in the US. So there's an initiative called Sheltered Harbor in the US. And Sheltered Harbor was as a result of banks realizing that if one of them got attacked, the rest would probably either fail or have a very, very, very bad time in business. So they decided, let's create an initiative that allows us to continue to operate the core functions of the banks, even if we've had a very, very destructive cyber attack. Right? And so this was started in the US and currently only available to US organizations. But I want to talk about what they created, not the specific organization. So what they created was something called a sheltered harbor, right? And a sheltered harbor is really a vault. It's a place where each of the participating organizations put their critical data and put that there every day. And then if those organizations are attacked and destroyed, we can continue to operate the basic operations of the bank from that data vault, right? So it'll be things like balance of accounts, mortgage payments, transactions, all those things are put into the vault. And the idea is the vault is immutable. You cannot change it. The vault is not within the data center, it is somewhere else, right? So if someone attacks your data center, they're not going to attack the vault. It needs to be accessible, it needs to be decentralized. So they've created a framework that allows member institutions to build into this framework and allow them to be able to operate the basics. So this doesn't mean everyone gets their email back. This just means the basic operations of the bank can continue. Now, if you stretch that out outside of the US and outside of just banks, we want to do a similar thing. We want to make sure that we put our data somewhere so that we can continue to run our buses, that we continue to operate our hospitals, that we can continue to operate our electricity grids. And we'll talk more about that. But the important thing is really this data vault. Right? And their design was really around creating a data vault that was unchangeable, separate from their main data center, decentralized and owned and managed to provide operational separation. Governments were starting to react as well, right? So if you look at something like the US government National Institute of Standards and Technology, they introduced a framework that covered it. The National Center Internet Readiness in Japan talked about separating your backups and making sure that your data can't be deleted. The Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore talks about protecting critical infrastructure. And the Australian Cybersecurity Centre goes one step further and says, make sure that you have a way of recovering your data, right? In the US, the same thing is happening, right? They're talking about making sure there is a vault, there's an air-gapped copy of your environment. Consider maintaining offline copies of your backups. Ensure that your backups are not connected to your networks, right? So there's more and more focus on that recovery piece, and we'll talk about that. So if you look at it, and we talked about this earlier, cybersecurity is hard, right? Cybersecurity is only as strong as its weakest links. And with that increase in attack surface and that increase in the skill of the people attacking us, it becomes very, very hard to build cybersecurity. So as we talked about this is all about increasing our cyber resilience, increasing the ability of our organizations to survive. So the way that we do that is, if you look at the NIST cybersecurity framework, it talks about 5 main pillars. It talks about identifying your critical assets. It talks about creating a layer of protection around those critical assets and providing controls. It provides a layer of detection, right? Finding events that have happened in my environment, being able to recognize cyber events, being able to almost get them before they hit our organization. And then to be able to respond, to be able to shut down networks, to stop the spread of ransomware and those things. So to me, that is traditional security. That is traditional building multi-layers and multiple ways of doing it. What we're finding more and more is there's a focus on recovery. There's a focus on what do we do if everything else fails, right? And most security professionals these days will admit that if someone has enough money and enough time, they will get into an organization, and almost any organization, right? So we need to be able to have a safety net. We need to build cyber resilience, right? We need a way to recover our core business in that sort of environment. So how do we help? And how do you do that? How do you increase cyber resilience? So it's really, for me, about good, better, best. It's about having good protection strategies. And when I'm talking protection, I'm talking backup. Making sure you have a copy of your data, right? Making sure that data is recoverable. Making sure there is a separation of duties between storage and backup. So a single person can't delete your primary data and your backup data. So that's for most of the data in your organization. For the slightly more important data, we're going to look at hardening our environments. We're going to harden the data copies. We're going to harden the machines that the data lives on. We're going to lock the data so it can't be deleted. That adds operational cost, but it adds another layer of protection. So we may not do this for all of our data. We're going to do this for a certain part of our data. And then finally, for our absolute critical data, we're going to build a vault. Just like we talked about with Sheltered Harbour, we're going to keep a copy of our data isolated. And we're going to use that copy to recover from in case everything else is compromised in our production networks. So the first question I always ask is, do you trust your current backup? Do you think that if you have a small ransomware attack and say a handful of servers are compromised, can you recover? And the story I always bring up is the Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital. They had a ransomware attack, and they were using tapes to do their backups, right? They realized that recovering from tape and testing all of their tapes to see if the malware was on those tapes would take so long that was actually easier paying the ransom and cheaper paying the ransom than actually recovering from backup, right? So it's really, really important that we build a trusted backup environment. And to me, there's a number of components when it comes to rock solid data protection, right? We need to trust it. We need to know that if we have a significant cyber event, that we can recover our data. So I'll talk about a number of these individually, but to me, things like automation. We want to make sure that if someone adds data, it is automatically protected. We need to make sure that if we change our policies, that all those things are happen automatically. We want to make sure that as new machines are created, they're automatically added, right? So we reduce errors and we ensure a service standard. The other thing that's really important is reporting and governance. We need to go back to our auditors and tell them that we are backing everything up, that we have multiple copies. And those things are really important. The first one, though, is we need to focus on recovery, not backup. And I know every single time anyone talks about backup, they talk about backups. But the reason you do backups is you want to recover. Now, I would argue that recovering significant amount of data from tape, at the same time analyzing all of those copies on tape to make sure that the malware is not on that backup copy and the data hasn't been corrupted, does not meet your recovery objective. So our recovery for our critical data needs to come from disk. And I would argue if you're going to use disk, you need to use deduplication, right? You need to reduce the amount of data we store to make it cost effective. And when you're doing deduplication, you want to make sure that you get the best possible deduplication that's happening, right? So here's an example of all the different compression mechanisms that are out there in industry. Compression 2-to-1, single instancing will give you about 3-to-1. If you do fixed block deduplication, you'll get somewhere between 4 and 6-to-1. And if you use variable block deduplication, you will actually get somewhere around 20-to-1, right? So deduplication allows you to make disk more cost effective and therefore allow you to do backups to disk and therefore recover from disk. Don't forget the other benefit of having backups on disk is that we can check them. We can read them, we can validate that the data hasn't been modified, we can validate there's no malware in it. This is almost impossible if you're doing it on tape. We need to protect cloud. Many of my customers that I talk to are moving critical data and business data into cloud. I've got customers that are moving their SAP HANA databases into Azure. I've got customers that are moving their big Oracle databases into AWS. I've got customers that are using Google's databases to store customer data, right? So we need to make sure that we back up data and protect data on-prem, but we also need to think about the cloud, because the cloud is not immune from ransomware. The cloud is not immune to having data encrypted, right? So we need to make sure that we do that. And we need to separate primary data from backup, right? In many cases, taking a snapshot of a virtual machine is a really quick way to create a copy. But if that copy and the primary copy are sitting on the same appliance, we increase a risk, right? So, affecting one of my devices affects both my primary copy and my secondary copy. So we want that isolation of our backup data. The same thing what happens in cloud, right? We want to, if we're going to put workloads in cloud, we may want to think for some of our critical data to have a copy sitting outside of cloud, right? So if something happens to the cloud infrastructure, and it has happened, then we have another copy of that data sitting somewhere to allow us to do something. But just having good backups may not be good enough. If you look at advice from the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, and we're seeing this more and more, industry bodies and security bodies throughout the world are starting to find that cyber criminals are targeting backups because they have realized that if you have good backups, then you're not going to pay the ransom because it's easier just to recover the data, right? So what we're finding more and more is that cyber criminals are actually attacking the backups. And remember, right at the start, we talked about the fact that cyber criminals will spend time in your environment, working out where your backups are, working out where your disaster recovery copies are, working out where your snapshots may be, right? So really, really important that we're able to look at environments where backups are attacked. So more and more, as I said, we're seeing attacks on the command and control servers. So your backup server, we're seeing them attacked. We're seeing the backup clients attacked, and we're seeing the backup targets attacked. So if you're backing up to an NFS share, that could get encrypted. If you're backing up to cloud, we could see that encrypted as well, right? So it is important to understand that's happening. And because of that, we're actually finding that cyber is the new disaster. When I talk to my customers, they tell me that they are probably more likely to execute their cyber recovery plan than they are to execute their disaster recovery plan, right? And that's really, really important to think about. That, you know, with the reliability of our IT and our data center designs and things like that, it's becoming less and less likely that we actually need to enact our disaster recovery, where it's becoming more and more likely that we need to execute our cyber recovery plan. Having said that, cyber recovery is not disaster recovery. Cyber recovery protects against different things, has data stored in different ways, and has a whole bunch of services that we don't have within disaster recovery, right? Disaster recovery is designed to be close to instance. Cyber resilience is generally done through backups or copies of your data. The disasters that we're talking about are usually regional or contained. A cyber event can span the entire world as it traverses your networks, right? So it's really, really important that we don't look at our disaster recovery solutions and think that we actually have a cyber resilience. What we want to do is we want to build something like this. We want to build a cyber vault. You know, in case of cyber attack, pull the cables. So we have an isolated copy of our data, right? And our vault needs to have three properties. It needs to be isolated, right? So it cannot be on the production network all the time. It needs to be separated. So if we have an attack, we can logically or physically pull the wires. The data that goes into the vault needs to be immutable. We can't change it. So even if a vault admin goes in, they cannot make changes to that data. So we're adding defense in depth. And then finally, and this is actually really important, we need to understand the data, because when we have to recover, we need to be able to tell very, very quickly which data is good and which data is bad. Because if that takes me too long, like it did with the Presbyterian hospital, there's no use in having recoveries. There's no use in trying to get the data back because it's taken too long. So the vault would look something like this. We have our data sitting in a data center, and we synchronize periodically the data into a cyber recovery vault, right? So we have a copy of that data sitting somewhere across an air gap, right? So we sync the data, and we have the vault connected to the production network while that's happening. And then when we've finished, we disconnect it. So at that time, the vault is actually physically isolated from the network. As we talked about, the data sitting in the vault must be immutable. So you cannot delete it until it's no longer required. And we need to start analyzing that data as well. Okay. So how do we start this journey? Right? The first thing we need to do is we need to think about what our critical rebuild data is. What do we need to completely rebuild our environment in case of a large-scale cyber attack? And don't forget, when we've had a large-scale cyber attack, everything on the production side of the network is suspect. My backup server could have been compromised. My golden images for my virtual machine may have been compromised. My Oracle binaries may have been compromised, right? So you want to think about putting things into your vault that help you rebuild after a large attack. So things like authentication and Active Directory, any certificates that you have, private keys, private certificates. You want your networker and switch configuration, right? It's no good getting the entire environment back up and running if your network switches aren't working. You want to be able to put your storage back together. You want your hardware configuration, your firmware, your microcode. Obviously, anything that's intellectual property, you want to put into the vault as well. You don't want people to be able to destroy that. You want to look at things like host and build tools, right? I want to put my golden image for my, my Linux build into the vault. So if I need to recover, I've got a clean version of it. And then finally, really importantly, I want to put my run books and my rebuild documentation into the vault, right? Again, I don't want to rely on anything sitting on the production side of the network when I'm doing a large rebuild. We also look at our operational technology, right? If you're running industrial control systems, you want to protect, say, the firmware, the ladder logic, the service contracts. And this sounds like a really simple one, but the license keys, right? A lot of these industrial control systems have license keys and licenses that you need to turn on for the systems to actually run. So if someone comes in and encrypts or disables the control logic, we want to have a place that we can get clean data from. And then it comes down to what else you put into it, comes down to industry. In healthcare, for instance, it's about EMR, it's about payment, it's about billing. And life sciences, it's about drug research. Most countries will tell you that if a drug is in the market, all the clinical data needs to be available. So if someone deletes that clinical data, potentially a drug could get pulled from the market because we don't have the clinical trial data. For retailers, it's about point of sales, inventory, and it goes on and on and on. So it's really about identifying those individual pieces that are so important that goes into the vault. So the thing is, you don't need to necessarily do this yourself, right? At Dell Technologies, we've been doing this for a while. We started in 2015 when a customer came to us and said, I am worried about, this was one of the big global banks. And they said, I am worried about an attack taking out all my critical systems and not being able to meet payment requirements, interbank transfers, and those things. And we help them build a vault technology, much like we've talked about, that has that isolation, immutability properties. So we help them write scripts. We help them, create a bunch of technology around that. And we turned that into a product because we found more and more of our customers were actually looking to leverage these. We are actually endorsed by Sheltered Harbour as being a solution provider, which basically means that our technology is able to be used to implement Sheltered Harbour in the US, right? So we can help US banks and US financial organizations build a vault, but we can also help our customers across Asia and across the rest of the world build vaults as well. We have over 300 customers, and most of these are not banks. Most of these aren't Fortune 500 customers. These are smaller organizations such as hospitals. These are smaller organizations such as departments in government departments in Indonesia. We've built vaults for government departments in Singapore. We've helped airlines across Asia to build these vaults because they've all realized that they may not be able to meet all of the different security requirements, but they're willing to build an insurance policy. So some of the bigger ones, we've worked with large financial services organizations, And here it's really easy to talk about vaulting, right? Because an outage is something like $10 million a day. You know, the bigger banks in the world carry an operational project budget of somewhere between $5 to $10 million a day, which means if your people are not working for one day, you've wasted $10 million worth of project dollars, right? So it's very, very important that that you understand the risk profile. The other one we see quite a lot is the healthcare industry, right? Where it is such a long journey for a lot of healthcare organizations to bring their security to the level where it needs to be. So in the meantime, what they're doing is they're building a vault, right? Just in case things go wrong, we want a vault. We want a vault that's not connected to the network, where we do analytics of the data to make sure that we can identify the correct backup, right? So we see these things in a lot in healthcare, and the other one we see is a lot in government organizations, right, where they're very, very interested in making sure that their government services, which are more and more online, are not interrupted, because it affects people's welfare payments, it affects people's tax obligations, it affects people's health entitlements. You know, all these things are actually critical to an organization. So we want to make sure that those things are not affected. So generally, I ask you to think about a couple of questions. So A, can you identify what your critical applications are? Can you identify what is absolutely necessary to continue to run your organization? And like I said before, this is not email. This is not about making sure that everyone can access the printer. This is about keeping the buses running. This is about keeping hospitals running. This is about keeping tax information available, right? So really about identifying the critical applications and the critical data in your organizations to put into a vault. The second question I would is, do you trust your backup environment? Would you be able to recover from a large scale cyber event? And not only recover, but recover in time. All right, so not have to spend days and weeks analyzing the data to work out if you have clean copies, but recover in a timely manner. And then finally, I'd like you to think about the fact, are you able to recover if your backups were also compromised, right? So as we're seeing happening more and more, are we able to recover that data in a way that allows you to protect that? And if the answer is no to any of these, please come talk to us. We've been doing this for a long time. We're able to help you with this and help you with this process. If you want any more information, there's a couple of links that get you some information about what we're seeing in the market, what some of the analysts think about what's happening in the market, and what's happening and what they think about our cyber recovery solution and our vault technologies. So that's all I wanted to cover today. I really hope that this has been useful. My role is to support our teams across Asia Pacific and Japan. Today, obviously, I can't travel as much as I used to, but you know, when the borders open up again, I fly all across Asia to have these discussions with our customers and to help them increase the level of their cyber resiliency. So if you have any questions or queries, please contact us. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. I'm happy to answer them. But otherwise, thank you very much for your time. Yeah, so there's a question about verified accounts and lots of different accounts, right? So really, if you look at it's really a side effect of moving outside of our data centers, right? That, there'll be a set of credentials for the cloud. There'll be a set of credentials potentially for the VMware environment. There'll be a set of credentials for your backup environment and all those sorts of things. What we do is not necessarily about identifying which credentials do what, because there's many other vendors out there that have technology around that, right? What we're able to do, however, is we see the results of a cyber event. So we look for things like files being encrypted. We look for things like files being deleted or files being changed in a way that's not normal. And when we see that, that's where we can actually have a look at, because we also do analytics of your security logs and things like that. So we're able to identify which users made changes on which files. So we're able to identify potentially which accounts were compromised, where the infection started. We can, because we hook into the backup system, we can identify which host was attacked first, because we can see the files being encrypted. We can see the files being changed. We can see the files being deleted, right? So by building all of these analytics into the vault, we're able to do a whole bunch of post-event forensics as well to help our security teams and our security forensic teams be able to work out what actually happened in that environment. So I hope that answered the question.